Welcome to the Contractor Success Forum. Today we are talking about why you should check your bank account every single day and why I've changed my advice on this over the last few years. I'm Wade Carpenter with Carpenter Company CPAs, and who is here with me to do that? Normally we would have Stephen Brown with McDaniel Whitley Bonding and Insurance Agency, but unfortunately he couldn't be with us today, and I am privileged to have back with us Amanda Darr of Amanda Darr Designs. Amanda, thank you for jumping in to help us. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me again. It's good to be back, and I'm excited to hear about this topic and how you've changed your thoughts on it. So it should be a good one.
Okay. I know I'm going to talk about a few things that we're going to talk about the old analogy of if you're trying to lose weight, maybe you shouldn't step on the scales every day. And I also we're going to talk about what I used to tell contractors is don't watch your cash every day because they got the wrong impression. I felt you should be looking at your accounting system. When I jumped into Profit First, then when you set it up properly, I've changed my tune. I think that we should be. We'll get into some of the details on this a little later, but I've also seen a ton of fraud in the last few years with contractors. And we're going to talk about the businesses do not have the same protections that consumers, individuals have with as far as like bank fraud. And I want to spend some time talking about that. So does that work?
That works.
Well, if it's okay, let's jump into the fraud part to start with.
Yeah, let's start with that. I'm curious to hear more about the differences between the consumer protection rules and business and why that makes it so much more important to keep an eye on things.
Right. A little background, my wife is actually in banking compliance. We've done some episodes on this where I've seen so much bank fraud with my contractors in the last few years, and I've heard some horror stories from our contractors. And believe it or not, it doesn't matter how much money you've got with a bank or how big a client you are. Maybe if you're big enough, they will care, but you could very well lose some money. And it all falls to what your agreement is with a bank. With an individual, there are some protections under several different regulations, as well as the Uniform Commercial Code, where you have, generally speaking, up to 30 days. My wife cautioned me not to get into the details of all this, and you probably don't want to hear all the details. But if you have a fraudulent ACH or a check or something like that, then you've generally got maybe 30 days to go back and make that right, or the bank has to make that right. When you're talking about a business, the rules are very different depending on, and she was explaining whether you fall under Fed rules, as well as if you've got a business account under a credit union. But suffice it to say, if you don't report a fraudulent ACH or a fraudulent check or wire, like within one day, you're very likely to lose that.
Wow, one day.
One day. And again, that I started asking these questions after I saw some of my contractors getting hit with this. And the banks don't talk about it, but they do put that in their agreements. And again, because the rules are so convoluted, you really need to go take a look at what your bank has rules on that. But so that's one of the major factors in talking about looking at it every single day, because you could very well lose it. And unfortunately, again, when the banks clear these things so much faster now, they can't get it back from the bank it came from. So that's the main problem.
I see.
So without going into more boring detail, does that sort of make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, the kind of main takeaways there are be aware maybe of what your agreement and what the rules are with your bank. And also, it's very important to catch any issues early. Are there any other best practices for mitigating financial losses around that?
Well, again, number one, if you question a transaction, report it immediately. Call somebody, contact them. That's the only way you're going to protect yourself. But again, I've heard some horror stories in the last few years, and I know one particular one for $8,000 or $10,000 where they knew exactly who intercepted the money went to. It was like a hair salon or something. It had nothing to do with construction in like Virginia or something like that. And the contractor was in Georgia. And it was amazing to me that They know exactly who got it, but that hair salon or whatever, whether it was a nail salon or something, they said that they were due that money. So there was nothing they could do. And I think they were trying to get lawyers and the law enforcement involved, but essentially, I think they gave up and had to eat that $10,000. And there's several other situations where I've heard stuff like that. I guess changing the subject, I guess we talked about what I used to tell contractors, right? I always used to feel that people would run their business by what's in their bank account, especially contractors. And it's so easy to just, it's human nature. If you got a ton of money in your bank account, you feel good. If it's pretty slim pickings, there's not much in there, you feel like the world's coming down. We talk about it with Profit First, that people tend to overspend when you got a ton of money in there and they keep one bank account. And not to go into too much detail, in Profit First, we play this little M&M game. And the point of it is psychologically, we treat money very differently when we have a lot of it versus a little bit. And part of the benefit of Profit First is we're going to put it in these little buckets and we carve it down, and we only have, like, for our operating expense, X amount to spend in that. And we see a smaller amount, then we're less likely to overspend that. But we also don't have this huge balance thinking, hey, I can go buy that brand new truck.
Yep.
So again, doing this, it's all in how you set up your bank accounts. It's more along the lines of where we put our money. And if you treat it properly, I think that it's not a bad thing to check your bank balance every day. I think, in fact, I advise it because of the fraud issues, but it's tough to do. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I relate this to the analogy of trying to, we said, stepping on the scale every day. If you're, the old analogy is don't do that because you're going to get discouraged, because one day you'll go up and one day you may go down a little bit, and then you eventually get discouraged.
Right.
And so there's pros and cons to that. I actually have been trying to lose some weight lately, and I actually step on the scale every day. And I kind of disagree with that logic, because if I'm watching where I am and things start to go off track, if the weight suddenly shoots up, it's like, hey, you got to do something where you got to put some controls on it or something like that.
Absolutely.
And I go back and forth where you're worried about getting discouraged with it, but also, hey, you kind of got some self-control in there. Like, hey, if you start hitting the next 10 or something like that, the number goes up. Hey, maybe it's time to do something, versus you get on the scale every 30 days or something like that. You don't know how you were doing until, that's the same thing I say about contractors with job costing. It's, you don't know where you are, and then you all of a sudden look up and then, hey, it's just, we made a big mistake, and now how do we correct it? It's got to be a lot more drastic correction.
Exactly.
So
notice just small changes going off track, you can course correct more easily in the moment.
Right. But again, obviously there are all kind of things to think about with checking your banks. Obviously, if you overdrew your account and you saw that, you could go ahead and possibly make some adjustments. But a lot of times they will post those things overnight. And if you cover it by the end of the day, then there's not an overdraft fee, those kind of things. So I think it needs to be a balanced mindset. And again, I felt like in the past, contractors would run their business by what's in their bank account. And if they don't have any controls like Profit First, they made the wrong decisions. And I still believe that looking at your bank, your cash basis, is the way to manage your day to day and your, week to week and month to month. If you start looking at the financials, that's how you steer the long term course of your business, if that makes any sense.
It does. And with the Profit First method, does Profit First recommend checking those bank account balances that frequently? And how does it work with all of the different bank accounts? Do you recommend checking all of them? Or
number one, I guess if it's in the same bank, that's another point I'm going to come to. But if it's in the same bank, it's easy to check. And if you got one screen, Profit First advises you to have at least two banks for some of that. which I'll get into. I think from Profit First and Mike McCallott's standpoint, a lot of business owners will check their bank every day. They'll log in. They made it very easy with these phone apps, but they're not necessarily checking to see these transactions. They're just saying, "Hey, what's in my bank account?" And so they're
Balance.
not really looking for these fraud things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they might notice some big shift, but if it's something smaller, they won't see it on the transaction level necessarily.
So about a year ago, I started watching mine and started playing with the technology a little bit because I, especially after I saw some of that with my client, I figured I better be looking at my banks every single day. But I had it actually spread across three different banks, and having to log into three different banks was a pain.
Right.
So what I had set up was some playing with technology. There's ways to pull the bank balance from different sources, but it was hard to get it in one place. And I've been playing with the technology for a while, as well as these things like Zapier or whatever. And I do actually get a report every single morning that's texted to me and emailed to me that, hey, these are the bank balances in this bank and this bank and this bank, as well as here's the transaction for the last 3 days. So I can take a quick look at that and get a quick daily snapshot of where I am on that. And it's something I've been working on and I've expanded on a little bit to where now I start looking at certain things like receivables and what's the monthly revenue and those kind of things. But that's something that I've really enjoyed doing. And I've started turning this into a service because I believe contractors, they have a lot of money that comes in and goes out really quickly. And this is something just for the fraud reason, obviously, but I believe they really should be looking at their bank every single day just for the transactions, but also this daily health snapshot of what you're doing, as well as if you can get it into this one dashboard where, hey, here's my flash report and this is where we are. And if you can see some of these other KPIs in one place, it's been a game changer for me. But I hope that makes some sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like a tool that could be incredibly useful for these contractors who are on the go. They don't necessarily have time to sit down at a computer every day and open up all these different accounts and look at them individually. So I could see how that would be very helpful.
But again, I feel like there's contractors out there that if they are playing with one bank account and they're managing the way I was describing before,
Mhm.
that may not be the right way to do it. But also, from my standpoint, when I started doing Profit First, and I've seen this with several contractors that we've implemented on, where we talk about just even if we're putting like 1% in the profit and you start seeing that profit grow, it's encouraging. As you start seeing money grow in your tax account, and you start having money in your owner's comp account where you can start paying yourself. Because I say it all the time. Too many contractors tell me all the time that their receptionist takes home more money than they do. And I believe getting some clarity around your cash flow is a huge game changer. At least it was for me. And I've seen a couple of contractors that when we put these kind of controls in place, it's made a huge difference in their not only their cash flow, what they can take home, but I also, and I believe this myself because I've experienced it, when you feel like you're winning, you want that feeling to go on. So it spurs you on to try to achieve more. Again, I don't mean to launch into other things we talk about on this podcast all the time about, hey, we start chasing this top line and maybe that's the right thing for a contractor, maybe not if you're not chasing margin. In my case, more top line translates to more profit because I've covered my overhead. Too many contractors, their revenue will go up, but they also their overhead will go up with it because they start thinking, hey, I have this money and I'm doing, I don't know, 10 million a year or whatever the number jumps to. They feel like they have the money, but it never seems to materialize for themselves. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. So, yeah, if you just look at that one overall number, it can be quite deceiving because your expenses are going up too. But if you have that all allocated out using the profit first method and you're keeping an eye on it, not only looking for potential problems or fraud, but also celebrating those wins and seeing that growth over time, you overall just have a much clearer picture of the financial health of your company and make sure that it's going in the right direction.
Going back to things like the analogy of stepping on the scale every day, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've always heard that debate, but I do think it makes sense to me. If you're only looking at your weight every 30 days, it's going to be really hard to, first of all, the number might change way more drastically, and that can be extremely discouraging if it's going in the wrong direction. But also, you're going to have a really hard time pinpointing what went wrong or getting a more clear picture of the last 30 days. Whereas if you're checking in daily, you understand what's going on and you're empowered to make those changes to get things moving in the right direction. And it sounds like that's a great analogy with the financial health of your company as well, especially for contractors who do have so much moving in and out that could be missed in the overall picture. So it makes a lot of sense to me,
Okay.
especially if they have a tool that helps them look at it every day without spending tons of time or effort.
Yeah, I mean, we are going to be rolling that out. That's really not the point of today, but we are actually kind of rolling that out in the next month or so.
Cool.
Because I truly believe you should be looking at it. And as well as my problem was, hey, I don't want to log into 2 or 3 different places. I didn't really even mention credit cards because credit cards can be a crutch for any business owner, but contractors. So that's another piece that I brought into mind is, hey, here's my cash, but here's also my credit card balance. It's where I'm balancing that kind of stuff out. I feel like it's helped me. And for a contractor where cash is king, I think it's something that I believe people should be doing is checking every day, one way or another.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you have any tips for somebody who maybe isn't doing that at all or maybe hasn't implemented Profit First of how to get started with making that more of a habit every day or anything like that? Any stories you've seen?
So I would say, number one, there are a lot of contractors are still very old school on a lot of these things.
Mhm.
And some of them don't trust the banks and that kind of stuff. But don't be afraid to go ahead and sign up for the online banking where you can at least take a look at it and get in there pretty quickly on your phone. If you don't do something from a profit first standpoint, I would say I do believe in the system. I truly believe in it because I've lived it and it's made a big difference in my business as well as the contractors I've helped implement it on. It's been rewarding to me after 30 something years in this business to be able to help contractors get control of their cash. And I don't know, the older I get, I suppose it's a lot more rewarding than giving somebody their tax return or something like that and making sure that they pay the least tax possible. And that's still a goal, but shouldn't always be the goal. It should be maybe you should take something home at the end of the day.
Absolutely. It's a great goal.
But I guess final thought, just stay vigilant one way or another because you can get away from you in a hurry.
Yeah, I can imagine if you're not checking in fairly frequently, that it can almost feel like you just don't even have control over those numbers or the cash flow. Whereas if you start making it a habit to check in every day, you can be empowered to have some more control over that, which is a great thing.
Okay. Thank you all for listening to the Contractor Success Forum, wherever you might be tuning in from. Find us on all major podcast platforms, on contractorsuccessforum.com or on the Carpenter CPA's YouTube channel for more information, and be sure to check our show notes for more free resources. If you haven't already, we would sincerely appreciate it if you would consider subscribing to this channel. Ring that notification bell to follow each episode as we post it every week. We sincerely appreciate your support and comments in this journey, and we will look forward to seeing you on our next episode.